today I've titled this one King of the South because we're going to focus a little bit more on the King of the South instead of the King of the North like we did last time. And then our next talk is where I'll bring it back together with Revelation and the geologic events. So we're going to cover from about verse 20, finished with verse 22, I believe, last time. So we'll cover verse 23 through 39. So we'll save the last 5 verses of the chapter for the next talk, which is, of course, everyone pretty much interprets those last 5 as the future 5 verses. So it's kind of appropriate to have that as a separate talk, I think, and bring in Revelation there and where the two parallel. And today, so I want to kind of really dive into the concept of the King of the South. So we talked last time about the King of the North primarily, and how God is the ultimate King of the North. And then that transitioned through the various metals in the vision of Daniel chapter 2 and the beasts of Daniel chapter 7 and 8, right, through various kingdoms from Babylon to Medo-Persia to Greece to Rome. And that's kind of where we left it. And so there's this false king of the north, right? Human king of the north that is standing in for Satan, another false king of the north, who's trying to take over God's position as the ultimate king of the north. So really, there's only one king of the north. And I think that also there's only one king of the south. And I think it's our job to kind of try and identify who that is in history, because I think that'll help us determine who he is in the future as well. And I believe that the king of the south has always been and will always be the king of Egypt. So at first, we talked previously about how Pharaoh Necho went up against Babylon and Nebuchadnezzar, but was defeated at Carchemish, and then later Persia conquered Egypt at Pelusium. So I believe that the one who plays the role opposite Babylon was the king of Egypt in history and continues to be the king of Egypt. And now the king of the south in Daniel 11:5 through 19 is interpreted as the Ptolemies. So those first 20 or so verses of Daniel 11 are pretty universally interpreted. There's not a lot of debate on them. And so I think we've got a long chain of the king of the south being interpreted as the king of Egypt. And interestingly, there is no mention of the king of the south in verses 20 through 24. And I believe that we put those time as the pagan Roman Empire. You find the Prince of the Covenant, which we believe is Yeshua the Messiah, in those verses. So there's no independent kingdom of Egypt, and in the prophecy, there's no mention of the king of the south. We don't see the king of the south appearing again until verse 25. So who would that king of the south be? That's the question, right? So let's go back and let's talk again about because I stopped at 22 last time for time's sake. So let's talk verses 23 to 24 before we get to 25. I believe this represents the transition from pagan Rome to papal Rome. These verses saying, and after the league is made with him, he shall act deceitfully, for he shall come up and become strong with a small number of people. He shall enter peaceably even into the richest places of the province, and he shall do what his fathers have not done, nor his forefathers. He shall disperse among them the plunder, spoil, and riches, and he shall devise his plans against the strongholds, but only for a time. So comes in peaceably but deceptively, and I believe that this could be a reference to the transition from pagan to papal Rome. Many years later, there was kind of a push to legitimize that transition with something called the donation of Constantine, which turns out is actually a forgery. But in that is a forgery supposedly granting the Pope political authority by Constantine. And I think there's also a donation of Justinian and some others. They're forgeries. And so that's where the deceitful, rise, but it was also done peaceably. There was no real conflict related to this, other than the debates, like say at the Council of Nicaea, where this really you really started to see Christianity become the legal religion of the day. And Council of Nicaea, right, talks about the Trinity issue. It talks about the Quartodecimian issue, so the keeping of the memorial of Christ's death and resurrection either on the 14th day of the month, as was Passover done, or with the new way that Christians were doing it, kind of to move away from that, keeping it on a new day of on Sunday, always every year. So there was that conflict, and there was also the Sabbath conflict, and all these things were kind of discussed at the Council of Nicaea, and then we see some compromises being made with paganism. And so this is, I think, how we see that transition from pagan to papal Rome. So the king of the north, I think, moves from these geopolitical empires to more of these religious political empires. And they're supported by the state. And so I think that there's kind of this dual aspect. Maybe you have a religious leader like the Pope, as well as maybe a state leader who's a king. But anyway, so the next verses, 25, we'll read them off here. He shall stir up his power and his courage. So it's talking about the king of the north against the king of the south. So finally, we see the king of the south again with a great army. And the king of the south shall be stirred up to battle with a very great and mighty army, but he shall not stand, for they shall devise plans against him. Yes, those who eat of the portion of his delicacies shall destroy him. His army shall be swept away, and many shall fall down slain. But these kings' hearts shall be bent on evil, and they shall speak lies at the same table. But it shall not prosper, for the end will still be at the appointed time. While returning to his land with great riches, his heart shall be moved against the Holy Covenant, so he shall do damage and return to his own land. So here we see some alliances and broken alliances, and we see some friendships going on, right? They're at the same table eating, but lying to each other at the same time. We see a allusion to the end, so not this particular time, but the end will still be at the appointed time, the Hebrew word Moedim, which I know you guys are all familiar with, but I'll talk very briefly about. And we see that there's a battle, right? There's some battles and there's a war. And the king of the north apparently loses the war eventually, loses the struggle that began at the first part of these verses, and by the time at the end, he's kind of kicked out and he returns to his own land, but he takes a lot of riches with him. But he's annoyed, and so he goes against the Holy Covenant and does some damage back in his own land. I believe that this is referring to the time period of the Arab Crusades. And I know that's up for debate, and it has been a big debate over the last 10, 15 years in the Adventist Church. So I hold it loosely, but I'm going to present it to you guys. So the the battle that was won by the king of the north, I believe, refers to the capture of Jerusalem, which happened in 1099. You have the Pope calling on the secular authorities to come to his aid, and you have a religious holy war, or Urban II, and then you had the secular forces and other several waves of crusade going in, but the big one was the capture of Jerusalem and the Battle of Ascalon in 1099. And so after Pope Urban called for these crusades, Jerusalem was captured. Then the Islamic Fatimid Caliphate came to try and take Jerusalem back right away. So that same year, right, you have these reinforcements coming from Cairo, Egypt, which was the capital of the Fatimid Caliphate, and they're defeated as well. So the Crusaders were able to kind of gain Jerusalem and hold on to Jerusalem for a time. So we have the king of the north that has transitioned to the papacy, and who's coming against the papacy? Well, in the prophecy, it's the king of the south, and in history, it's the Islamic Fatimid Caliphate that is actually based in Egypt. So here again, I think we see that suddenly, now we're talking about the king of the south and the king of Egypt, I think being synonymous terms again. So what does it mean to talk about the lies and broken promises? I believe these were very common amongst the various factions. You had Christians and Muslims going against each other, but you also had sometimes the Christians allying with the Muslims in order to go against other Christians. So, for example, Conrad I, the king of Jerusalem, it's actually suspected that he was killed by Richard the Lionheart, who hired assassins, Hashashirim, who were Muslims, right, to kill Conrad so that Richard could gain more power. Richard being king of England and a portion of France at the time. So that happened in 1192. So we kind of transition over kind of a broad sweep of history here with the Crusades. But this is a big conflict between Richard Lionheart and Salah ad-Din. Okay, Salah ad-Din being the new ruler from Egypt. So we have a king in the north, right? King from England and France, being supported by the papacy, who inherited the king of the north title from Rome, right? And then they're going against this king of the south coming from Egypt. So what happens afterwards? Well, eventually, we all know the story. The Crusaders are kicked out of Jerusalem by Salah ad-Din. And so while they had won some battles, including capturing Jerusalem originally, they're eventually kicked out. So they have to return to their own land. And they did not retain the Holy Land. So they lose the war, they lose the struggle, right? But when they return, they take a lot of riches with them. So, and that is in the form of the riches that the Knights Templar were able to acquire, but also the many relics that they acquired from there. Relics like the True Cross and bones of various saints, etc., right? So return with all this stuff back to Europe. And then we see also at that time, severe persecution begins to break out against people who are keeping Sabbath and keeping the festivals and otherwise not bought into the papal system. So you have the Cathars in the Balkans, you have the Waldenses in the Alps. That's when the persecution of these religious groups really began. So you have a battle in which the king of the north kind of wins, but then he loses the war, and when he loses the war, he comes back and goes against the holy people, and I think that's what is referenced in the prophecy. So it's a bit of a pattern that we see here. We saw it with the Greek kings as well, right? They would lose a battle and they would get angry and they would go and do something to the Jews in Jerusalem, right? Now we're talking about the Christian era. So I want to talk about a little bit about the Moedim, the Cathars and Waldenses. I believe some of them kept these. So what are they? Well, they began at creation, right? And so here we have a translation, the Good News translation of Genesis 1:14. And in blue is the word Moedim in Hebrew. And so it says, Then God commanded, let lights appear in the sky to separate day from night and to show the time when days, years, and religious festivals begin, or as is commonly interpreted, some versions say seasons, but you'll see a lot of times the word appointed time whenever it talks about the Moedim. So these are specific points in time, just like days and years, but they're connected to the tabernacle. They're connected to the tabernacle because this word Moedim, about 3/4 of the time that it is used, it's actually used in just after the word. It's the tent of Moedim or the tabernacle of Moedim. So it's the meeting place. It's the tent of the festival. It's the festival tent. That's where 3/4 of the word in the entire Hebrew Bible is used to reference the tabernacle of the Moedim or the tabernacle of the festivals. The other quarter of the time is kind of referencing the time, so when something occurred. So we have solar years, I believe, based on equinoxes and would have been associated with the ripening of the barley. And then you have the months begin by sighting the crescent moon, right? So here you have the sun to tell time, the year, the moon to tell the months, and religious festivals both come into play then. Obviously, you guys know how to probably figure out the timing of the Moedim, but because we know it happens generally 1 to 2 days after conjunction, and at least a half an hour, you have to have at least a half an hour between sunset. And from my own personal experience, you have to have at least about 1% illumination. So knowing that, we can actually go back in history and we can find out when the Moedim occurred on the Gregorian calendar. And you'll see why that's important in a little bit here. So another key point about the Moedim is that they are Yahweh's Moedim, right? These aren't Jewish, these aren't Hebrew, these are Yahweh's Moedim, because Yahweh spoke to Moses saying, speak to children of Israel and say to them, the feasts of Yahweh, or the Moedim of Yahweh, which you shall proclaim to be holy convocations. These are my Moedim. 6 days shall work be done, but the seventh day is a Sabbath of solemn rest, a holy convocation. You shall do not work on it. It's the Sabbath of Yahweh in all your dwellings. These are the Moedim of Yahweh, holy convocations, which you shall proclaim at their appointed times. So we're in the English translation, right? We've got different words that we're translating from the one word Moedim. But in the Hebrew, what it's saying is that these are the Moedim of Yahweh. You shall proclaim them at the Moedim. So there's an action, a religious festival, and a time, a religious for those religious festivals, right? But they're both called the same thing. Both the action and the time are both Moedim, and that's what this verse is calling to. So the rest of Leviticus 23 goes on to list these. You have Passover and unleavened bread, Shavuot, Pentecost, Yom Teruah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot. So when we get back to Daniel, then he actually uses the word Moedim 6 times, but he has like 43 different times you find the word time in Daniel. So it's kind of a minority usage in Daniel to use the word Moedim. So, but he is referring to, I believe, a specific time, not just a general time. So in Psalm 75, it says, when I choose the proper time or the Moedim, I will judge uprightly. The earth and all its inhabitants are dissolved. So I've talked in Revelation, right? How I think that the appointed time of Sukkot as a Moedim is when we find the fires of hell cleanse and purify the earth while the inhabitants of earth are protected in the Sukkah of the New Jerusalem. And I think that Daniel reflects that when he talks in Daniel 8. He says, look, for at the appointed time, talking about the future, the end shall be, right? So the end is going to be not just any vague time, but a specific Moedim time. So we got to start thinking about one of those seven festivals in Leviticus 23 is when the end will be. It's specific because Daniel could have used other words for time, but he didn't. We find Daniel 11:27. It's mentioned 3 times. I'm just going to give you the two of them here. And the first one, he basically says the same thing as in Daniel 8. He says, for the end will still be at the appointed time. So he's saying, okay, there's an appointed time in the end. It's a future, okay? It's not a specific to a time in prophecy in the history, okay? Daniel 11:35, again, until the time, and there he uses the word eth for time, and he's talking about the end because it is still at the appointed time. So you can have a Moedim at the time, general time of the end. Okay. Daniel, so the Daniel uses 3 words for time. He uses Moedim, which only occurs like those 6 times. Generally, he uses the word eth, but he also uses the word zaman. So when he talks in Daniel 7 about intending to change times in law, it's the word zaman. And that word is actually, interestingly, still used by Jews today to refer to the prayer times. So those come into play, I think, in this prophecy. The other times he in Daniel 11 he talks about what was this? And with him who were strengthened her in those times. So this is referring to Berenice that we talked about in our last discussion. So, and again, general times in the time of Berenice. And this would be one of the uh, is it Antiochus the second, I believe. Then in Daniel 11, it says, now in those times, general sense, many shall rise up against the king of the south. And then Daniel 11:24, he will devise plans against the strongholds, but only for a time, right? So time general versus time Moedim, right? And so I just want you guys to kind of get that in the back of your mind that there's a difference between these words. Of course, we all know the importance of the seventh month movement. When in 1844, Samuel Snow presented at Exeter, New Hampshire, a camp meeting that Yom Kippur was to occur on October 22, 1844, determined that using the Karaite Jewish method. So that's the method that I'm using to determine dates for specific Moedim in history. Okay. So what I want to do now is we're going to go back to Daniel 11. And I'm going to show you the other reference to the Moedim. But this reference isn't referring to the time of the end, it's referring to a specific battle. That verse, Daniel 11:29 and 32 verses actually, it says, at the appointed time, or at the Moedim, he shall return and go toward the south, but it shall not be like the former or the latter, for ships from Cyprus shall come against him. Therefore he shall be grieved and return in rage against the Holy Covenant and do damage. And I've picked out 4 key words here that I think help us identify exactly when this prophecy was fulfilled. Notice that when he says this is a time in Daniel 11, the only time in Daniel 11, where he uses the word Moedim and he does not say the word at the end, which means this can happen before the end. Okay, so this Moedim is a specific festival in which he, the king of the north, goes toward the south, but it's not said king of the south. Okay, it just said he's going toward the south, and it shall not be like the former. Okay, the former being maybe the time period of the Arab Crusades, and the latter maybe being the future time that we haven't gotten to yet. Now, the word ships is actually an Egyptian loan word. It's Tazim, and the word Cyprus is the word Kittim. Okay, so some Bible translations say Kittim, others say Cyprus, because for the most part, in the ancient world, when they referred to Kittim, they were referring to the island of Cyprus. So, and notice what happens again here. It appears that the king of the north eventually kind of loses whatever war, gets angry, and goes against the Holy Covenant again and does damage, just like the former time. Okay. So any event that we're looking for in history, I think has to have these 4 keys. It has to occur on a Moedim. The king of the north has to be traveling in the direction of the south when he comes into conflict. It has to be a naval battle, and specifically it has to involve Tazim ships, which are a specific kind of naval vessel. And these ships have to have come from Kittim or Cyprus. Okay. Um, so what does the Ottoman Empire have to do with that? Let's find out. If you don't have those 4, everything crumbles. Okay. You have to have whatever interpretation you have for Daniel 11:29 through 30, I think has to fulfill these 4 keys. Okay. So we have the Tazim ships. Okay, this is Egyptian loan word that describes large war galleys. So these have been oared vessels with kind of a square mainsail and a shooting deck. Okay, and here they're depicted in the a commemorative painting of the Battle of Lepanto from October 7th, 1571. And we know that these ships operated in history throughout the Mediterranean. They were the primary means of the Greeks getting around in the Mediterranean, the Phoenicians, the Romans, and these ships were used until the Battle of Lepanto. After the Battle of Lepanto, they stopped being used. So the destruction in this battle was so complete, the navies were so destroyed that each of the 2 winners and losers, the Ottoman Empire on one side and the papal-led alliance on the other side, they both had to rebuild their navies, and when they did so, they transitioned to modern sailing ships. The oars were done at that point. You can see in this painting, you can see the emblems of the Crusaders, the papacy with the cross, and then you can see the crescent flags of the Ottomans as well here. Okay, so we have Tazim ships that are used in the Mediterranean from the ancient world up to 1571. So that's the time period we've got to be looking for a battle to fulfill this prophecy. All right, what about Kittim? Okay, so contemporary records from the time, we have pottery shards, so we have archaeological evidence in Israel that Kittim not only referred to the city-state on Cyprus, a Phoenician city-state, but they had at that time begun to use Kittim to refer to, in fact, the whole island. So Cyprus was broken up into many different city-states around 600 BCE, the time of Daniel. Kittim being one of the major sites. And so here we have, this is modern-day Larnaca, and we can still see these Phoenician boat ramps there that they've uncovered. So very, very important. It's a great harbor. It's on the south side of the island, so it's protected from winter winds and a key trading point. So I think that's how this one city-state, the name of this one city-state, kind of came to be used to refer to the entire island. So who owned Cyprus becomes the question at what time, right? So it's after the Arab Crusades, it became a Venetian colony. But just before this Battle of Lepanto, it actually was conquered by the Ottomans. So in 1570, a massive fleet actually lands at Larnaca here. They'd kind of tested the coastal defenses at Paphos and Limassol, but found a great place to disembark, 100,000 troops at Larnaca. And then they marched to Nicosia, the capital, laid siege to it, and just a couple of months, the capital of Cyprus surrendered, along with a city on the north coast, Kyrenia. But then they marched on Famagusta, and Famagusta took about a whole year. So they began their siege of Famagusta on the 15th, and that siege lasted all the way until August of 1571, the following year, when it finally surrendered. So at this point now, Cyprus is fully under the control of the Ottoman Turks, okay? And so now their navy is free to move from Cyprus elsewhere. And so what we see is we see all those oared ships that have brought the troops to specifically Larnaca, which is the site of ancient Kittim, the city of Kittim. They conquer the entire island of Cyprus, and now that entire navy can move on elsewhere. And so where do they move? They move to protect their frontier with the Christian world. Okay, so they kind of move up to the north and to the east along the coast of Greece. So you see that here we have from Larnaca and Famagusta, after the siege there, that these Tazim ships leave Cyprus and head to the Gulf of Patras here in Greece.
Ryan,
Yes.
excuse me, I think your slide is zoomed in. We
Uh-oh,
see
is that
mostly red. We don't see what you're pointing at.
okay? Sometimes it just needs a refresh. Is that
Okay, I see that we see the top round and your little purple
Basically
arrow.
too big. It's too big to see everything on it. Now I see
You
AUG.
need to zoom out more. The letters are cut off.
Yeah.
Right.
that's quite weird because it's
We don't see
okay.
the words on the right either. I see
Yeah, let me
A.
stop the
Okay.
share here real quick and I'll start it again and we'll see if that
Okay.
corrects it.
All right. There it is. That's good.
There we go. Okay, thank you. Good. All right. So you have the conquest of Cyprus in 1571 in August. Okay, and right after that, the Ottoman navy starts sailing and they are planning to spend the winter here at the Gulf of Patras in Greece between the Ottoman Empire and defending against the Venetians and the papacy who want their colony of Cyprus back. Okay, so the Pope calls for a Papal Holy League, and they leave in September. So you have Venice, the ships of Venice, but you have those allied with the Spanish kingdom as well. They both provide ships. They're flying now under the banner of the Papal Holy League, and they sail to the Gulf of Patras as well. So they're sailing to the south, right? And they're meeting up with Tazim ships that have come from Cyprus. And so October 5th, we can look back in history, and we know that on that day, the 8-day Moedim of Sukkot began. Maybe the 6th, maybe the 4th, right? It's because it is based on the sighting of the new moon. So we'll give ourselves a day or two on either side. But by October 7th, we are definitely in the festival of Sukkot, which is the day that the Battle of Lepanto was fought. So we have the Battle of Lepanto is a naval battle being fought on the Moedim of Sukkot against oared galleys that have come from Cyprus, where the king of the north has traveled towards the south. So you have these 4 keys, I believe, that fit. So what is the probability of this happening? I think it's very, very low. So when Daniel made the prophecy, you had about 2,500 years until it was fulfilled. No. 2,500 years until today, right? So when he made the prophecy until today, anytime during that, it could potentially be fulfilled. So 2,500 years, and then that gives you almost 1,000,000 days. And there's only 18 festival days, only 18 Moedim each year on which this could happen, right? You have a week of Passover, you have the week of Sukkot, and you've got Yom Kippur and Shavuot, right? Yom Teruah. So 18 days, okay? But we got to look for a time maybe when Egypt had no king and when Tazim ships were used. Now, Tazim were used in the ancient world all the way up until 1571. But Egypt was only conquered by the Ottomans and did not have a king like 54 years before that. Okay, so that's got to come into play here. So we've got 54 years times the 18 days, right? So that's a very small percentage of the potential days that you could actually maybe have this prophecy fulfilled, right? You've got the 4 points of the compass to take into account here, going towards the south. There's about 3,500 potential ports and harbors in the Mediterranean, including natural ones. And so throwing that in there, right? Knowing that, prophecy specifically says from Cyprus. The number of battles in history is estimated at 12,703. That's from basically a compilation of data from Wikipedia. Just let's pull all the battles in history. But the number of naval battles is estimated to be, you have 108 land battles to naval battles. So maybe only like 127 real naval battles in history, okay? So you do all the math, and I think that you've got less than 1 in a billion chances that these 4 keys would be fulfilled by any one particular battle. And so being fulfilled by the Battle of Lepanto, I think, really just nails it. So that this is kind of, to me, it's like the cornerstone of how you interpret the former and the latter. Because remember, in these 2 verses, you have these 4 keys, but it also mentions the former and the latter. And so you have, if you can identify the combatants in this battle, okay, then I think you can identify the combatants in the former battle. That's why I interpret it as the Arab Crusades against the king of the north, the papal king of the north. And you can interpret the latter then, which I believe is the end time battle, and I think it will also be between those same combatants. So what happens, right? Just like we saw that after the Arab Crusades, they went back and started persecuting the Cathars and the Waldenses. Well, right after the following year, you have the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre, where the papacy, it's lost the war against the Ottomans, and it goes and just slaughters many, many Huguenots, faithful believers and followers of Yeshua. And this painting, the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre painting, is in the Vatican, right? They commemorate the Bartholomew's Day Massacre, and in the same room they have that painting of the Battle of Lepanto. So these two events are very intricately tied together, and it's just amazing that this is where, like, this room is where they still hold like peace conferences and stuff. It's like you guys have nothing to do with peace, but so former and latter. You have the Battle of Lepanto between a papal-led Holy League and an Islamic Caliphate. I think that helps us identify the former, which I believe are the Arab Crusades, and the latter conflict, which I believe will be between these same religious factions or their spiritual successors, right? We don't necessarily need to be saying it will be the papacy, because remember, the king of the north frequently changes its name. Babylon, Persia, Greece, pagan Rome, papal Rome, right? It could change its name again, but it will still have the same characteristics, the same religion of force, fear, coercion, intolerance for religious liberty, right? Changing God's times and laws. Whatever the final beast form takes, it will have those same characteristics, I believe. So there are some key differences, right? There are some differences between the former and the between the Battle of Lepanto and the former and the latter. One of those being the Battle of Lepanto is naval, which is what the prophecy is talking about, right? But the others, there's no mention of ships. The other is the former one was fought over Jerusalem, and then the second one was fought over Cyprus. Not so much a religious war, it was more about trade in the Eastern Mediterranean, money. So, okay, maybe the Arab Crusade's different because it's fought over Jerusalem. Maybe the final one also different. Maybe it's fought over Jerusalem as well. And the interesting thing is, no kings are mentioned in these couple of verses. And so what do we know? Well, we know that it was a papal-led alliance versus an Ottoman Empire, but there was no king in Egypt at that time. So continuing on with Daniel 11:31 through 39, and forces shall be mustered by him, and they shall defile the sanctuary forces. Then they shall take away the daily and place the abomination of desolation. I will talk more about that at our next next time I'm here. Those who do wickedly against the covenant, he shall corrupt with flattery. But the people who know their God shall be strong and carry out great exploits. And those are the people who understand shall instruct many. Yet for many days they shall fall by sword and flame, by captivity and plundering. Now when they fall, they shall be aided with a little help. But many shall join with them by intrigue. And some of those of understanding shall fall, to refine them, purify them, and make them white, till the time of the end. Because it is still for the appointed festival. Then the king shall do according to his own will. He shall exalt and magnify himself above every god, shall speak blasphemies against the God of gods, and shall prosper till the wrath has been accomplished. For what has been determined shall be done. He shall regard neither the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women, nor regard any god, for he shall exalt himself above them all. But in their place he shall honor a god of fortresses, and a god which his fathers did not know he shall honor with gold and silver, with precious stones and pleasant things. Thus he shall act against the strongest fortresses with a foreign god, which he shall acknowledge and advance its glory, and he shall cause them to rule over many and divide the land for gain. So I'm going to focus right now on these people who instruct many and fall by flame and sword, and yet have a little help. And I believe this is a reference to the Reformation, right? During this time, many returned to the study of the Bible and began instructing others of its truths. Of course, many of these reformers were martyred, burnt at the stake, or beheaded. Martyrs like John Huss, burnt at the stake. And this Reformation really kicked off around the same time as the Battle of Lepanto. Okay? This Reformation was allowed to spread because Ottoman aggression distracted the papacy. And I think this is what it refers to when it's talking about the little help. And that is the fact that whenever the papacy would get ready to send an army into Germany to go take out the Protestants, they would have to divert that army to go battle the Ottomans, right, instead. So actually, the Ottomans were very well aware of this, and in a book called Al-Hajjari, the Book of the Protector of Religion Against the Unbelievers, it said that their teachers, speaking of Luther and Calvin, warned them, the Protestants, against the Pope and worshippers of idols. They also told them not to hate the Muslims because they are the sword of Allah in the world against the idol worshippers. That is why they side with the Muslims. And it's interesting to note that Martin Luther did indeed, he rejected holy war. He taught the Turks would destroy the papacy. And he noted some similarities with Muslims. He was in favor of publishing the Quran. So there was definitely some help that the reformers received from the Ottomans that allowed their vulnerable fledgling movement to really get off the ground. Versus the counter-reformers, right? So the Roman Catholic Church teaches it has the authority to change the times and laws of the Creator, which is blasphemy, right? It exalts the Pope into the place of God on earth, change the Sabbath to Sunday, Passover to Easter, and it does all this and prospers, right? And decorates its saints with gold and silver, just like Daniel talks about. So one of those was Ignatius of Loyola. He was a soldier, a celibate priest. Remember the phrase, they will not have the desire of women? Well, here you go, celibacy in the priesthood, the Roman Catholic priesthood. He was the founder of the Jesuit order in 1540. About this time, of course, he was given the title of saint. But the teachings of these Jesuit order have come in through intrigue into Protestant evangelical Christianity in the forms of preterism and futurism and ways of interpreting the Bible that take the microscope off of the Catholic Church and put it on something in the future or something way in the past, right? But you know, the Catholic Church, very interestingly, in this painting in the Karlschurch in Vienna, have this painting of this woman holding a cup, kind of like the woman in Revelation, and she's standing over the reformers, and the reformers are trying to do their Bible translations and write their publications, and you know, she's having their publications burnt, holding a cup, and you can see in the cup the symbol of the sun. And so they're taking pride in the fact that they are deceiving and persecuting the faithful, and sending also intrigues and getting them to begin to misinterpret the Bible, right? The Counter-Reformation. So before we dive into the last 5 verses next time, I just want to kind of put this timeline out there. So on the top, you see some various colors, and these colors are taken after the colors of the metals in Daniel, the vision of Daniel 2 in the statue. So first off, you have Nebuchadnezzar, the head of gold, and then you have the Persian Empire. And in the Persian Empire, you have the 4 kings that are mentioned in Daniel 11. You have beginning with Cyrus, and then Cambyses and Darius the first, finally ended up with Xerxes, okay? And then you transition to the Greek Empire, and you have Alexander the First at the beginning of that, right? Alexander the Great. And then you have the split of his kingdom into the 4 winds, and but Daniel 11 only focused on 2 of those, the north and the south, right? And so the kings of the north, the kings of the Seleucid Empire, Seleucus the first, Antiochus the second, Seleucus the second, and Antiochus the third. Then you have a commander, not an emperor, right, or a king, but you have a commander. Scipio puts a kind of an end to the Greek dominance. You begin to see the Roman dominance. You have Augustus and Tiberius, the collector of taxes. And then it transitioned, the Roman Empire transitions into the Papal Empire. You have the popes, but you also have them pulling the various kings of Europe into their alliances. So Urban II, Richard I, right? Pius V is the one who called together the Holy League that brought the ships of Venice and Spain together against the Ottomans. Okay. The King of the South, however, okay, begins, I think, with, you have Egypt, the power that was against Babylon, right? So that's Necho II. And you had eventually Egypt itself was conquered under the Persians, under Psamtik the third, when he lost to Cambyses II. And then you have, during the Greek time, you have the Ptolemies who ruled Egypt. And so they're described as the king of the south. During the time of Rome, however, Rome became a part of the Roman Empire, and so the prophecy does not mention any kings of the south when Rome is in control of Egypt. There is no king in the south. It's just the king of the north. After that, you have this time period, the Arab Crusades again, where you again see the term king of the south in the prophecy. So we have Salah ad-Din and the Fatimid Caliphate, and Richard I and the other Conrad I, other crusaders. So you see that conflict again between a king of the north and a king of the south. Then you see the transition to the Ottoman time period, and again during that time period, so Selim II would have been the ruler of the Ottoman Caliphate at the time of the Battle of Lepanto. There was no king in Egypt, and in those verses in Daniel, you do not see the king of Egypt referenced, but you do see instead that the king of the north is going toward the south, but not toward the king of the south, just towards the south as a geographic location, because I think the king of the south, there was no king. Okay, so I think that the king of the south is Egypt, was Egypt, is Egypt, will be Egypt again. So that's well, I've got one more slide. So just like you have this kind of timeline, I think you also see this kind of division at a global scale now today, where you have the king of the north is predominantly Christian. You have Europe and Russia, the Americas, all Christian. And then in the south, you have Islam, right? So you have Rome in the north and Mecca in the south on either side of Jerusalem. And I think this is what sets up for the final fulfillment of the verses in Daniel 11:40 through 45, where I think you'll have the king of the north representing Christianity as a whole, and the king of the south, I think, will eventually have a new ruler in Egypt who will be Islamic and come against the king of the north. But we'll get into that next time. Thank you, guys, and happy to discuss.
It would appear that your studies, which are excellent, verify Uriah Smith's studies almost as exactly.
Okay. I have not looked into Uriah Smith much. I just kind of the one who got me studied into this and interested in this was the book by Tim Rosenberg, Islam and Christianity. Randy and Michael Yonker there, and Roy Gain are kind of in this Islam camp there, but there's a whole several conferences over a few years that really discussed these things. And there was a position that Turkey was the king of the north and atheism is the king of the south, and there's a lot of different interpretations out there.
I'm glad to see you have the Counter-Reformation with Rivera and those guys, because futurism has invaded even the Adventist church. Everybody's putting it off till the future.
Yeah. Thank you, George. Yeah.
No, I agree with George. Excellent study.
Thank you.
I'm still thinking about things he said last week. So, but I really, I mean, it really just shows you the like when these prophecies of Daniel, just how specific the times are, and the use of times and holy days versus like holy gatherings, and yeah, just it's very, very specific, and it really just it just strengthens the word of God, and no wonder people have tried to destroy the testimony of Daniel for all these years. Just you know, with these false accusations about documentary theories and written after the times and after the events, and so just showing these events even thousands of years after Daniel wrote them. That's to me, and just the research you put in, and very much appreciated.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Thing about interpreting it as the Battle of Lepanto is that happens well after we already have the Dead Sea Scrolls, which record Daniel and these
Right.
verses and these prophecies, right? And they're
I was going to
so
mention the Dead Sea
specific.
Scrolls,
Yeah.
yeah. I was going to mention that, and a lot of these things have only been found in our generation, like the
Mhm.
last 50, 100 years, but a lot of the, they said forever, that made accusations against the books of Daniel, but in our times, in these end times, evidence has been uprooted. Like the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls and 12 different books, of Daniel, and
Yeah.
so yeah, amazing.
Yeah.
Well, thank you as always. That was good. And we'll get you back on here. I have my schedule pretty full. It might be the end of February, but we definitely want you to continue with us.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Sandy, for having me on again. I appreciate it. I'm enjoying it.
Oh yeah, we won't wait that long. I'll give up definitely go a spot for Ryan when we can. Don't wait till the end of February.
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and turn the YouTube off and back on again. So you guys continue talking.
So I know you guys have probably studied Daniel 11 before. What's just the general consensus usually amongst yourselves about who the king of South, who the king of North is?
Well, I will send you an email, Ryan, about a quote by Mrs. White
Mm-hmm.
about it. Not the
Okay.
king of the South, king of the North. It was about Daniel, and she quotes verses 30 through 36, and then she says, much of this prophecy has been fulfilled, is going to be repeated.
Yes.